Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome. Thank you for being here this afternoon and on the internet. So today we continue with the story of Joseph. Remember that last time Joseph, his brothers, they found the silver cup of divination in Benjamin's sack. And so they're returning back to Joseph to see what happens, because the one that had apparently stolen the cup, had to become a slave of Joseph. Of course, they don't know he's Joseph yet. So, but before we start the Torah portion, which is titled Vayigash, which means, and he came near, let's do the blessing for the Torah. And it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commanded us to engage ourselves in the words of the Torah. Amen. So Vayigash is found in chapter 44, starting in verse 18 through chapter 47, verse 27. And as I was saying, we're dealing still with Joseph and his brothers. So after the fiasco of finding the silver cup of divination, now they're back in the presence of Joseph. So verse 18 says, Then Judah came near Vayigash to him and said, O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing. And do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. Remember that the position that Joseph has is he's second in command. Therefore, he represents Pharaoh in everything. So he has the same authority. He has the same speech. He has basically is like he represents totally Pharaoh. And verse 19 says, My Lord asked his servants, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. So we have Judah speaking to Joseph. Now we have to understand that he doesn't know he's Joseph. And number two, we have to remember that there's someone translating. Okay, there's someone translating because Joseph speaks Egyptian. So he has an interpreter. Now the commentaries say that his interpreter is Manasseh, his own son. And it says in verse 21, Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. So one of the things we're going to notice is that Judah is going to focus on Jacob. Why? Because remember that the relationship between Joseph and Jacob was very tight. They were very close. So he's getting into the feelings. He's trying to, even though he knows it's not Joseph, but he's trying to make it more about Jacob than anything else. Verse 23, But you said to your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So it was when we went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, Go back and buy us a little food. But we said, We cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down, for we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. So Judah is giving like a summary of what has happened since they left Joseph the last time. Said, you said this, we need to bring our youngest brother so that we can get food again. So he's explaining to him that what they told him to Jacob, that if they go back to Egypt, Benjamin has to be with him. Verse 27, Then your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, Surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. Speaking about Joseph, because remember, he's referring to Rachel. Verse 29, But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now, therefore, when I come to your servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. So in a way, he's indirectly telling Joseph that if he does not return Benjamin, he's going to be as guilty as them for not bringing back Benjamin to Jacob. Yeah. Verse 33. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? So it's interesting that Judah is the one that convinced his brothers, to sell Joseph into slavery. And right now he is offering himself as a slave on behalf of Benjamin. So the story is completely different from what had happened when Joseph was sold and what had happened in the beginning. So Joseph here is seeing all this transformation, all this change, that Judah is now willing to give his life in exchange for Benjamin, something that he did not do in the beginning with Joseph, because now they're really concerned about their father. I imagine, remember that this is happening 22 years after Joseph was sold to Egypt. So it's been 22 years and now Judah has a change of heart. Chapter 45. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, make everyone go out from me. So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Because you have to remember that Joseph's position meant that he had guards with him, that he had probably officials with him. So he tells everybody to leave. Verse 2, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Imagine how loud he cried that all the house of Pharaoh heard him crying. Because you have to understand that he's probably taking out all this anguish, all this pain of so many years. He's taking all this out of his heart, out of his life, because now there's going to be a change. Now there's going to be reconciliation with his brothers. Remember all the stuff that he's went through. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. Can you imagine the shock? Yeah. Because the last time they saw him, he was 17 years old. He was sold. They have no idea whatever happened to him. Was he dead? Was he alive? And all of a sudden, here's this guy who's second to Pharaoh, who looks like an Egyptian. He's dressed like an Egyptian. He's speaking like an Egyptian. He has no beard. He's clean shaved. He's probably wearing a wig. His eyes have all these fancy makeup. So they can't believe it. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. So during all this time, now Joseph realizes that the dreams that he had, that everything that had happened to him since the moment he was sold by his brothers, that God had a purpose, that everything was in the design of God's plan to do this exactly. So he says, for these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So remember that what Joseph is doing, Joseph is a prefigure of Yeshua. Because remember that we understand, even though the Jews talk about a Messiah ben Joseph and a Messiah ben David, we know that it's one and the same one, but they think it's two Messiahs. So Joseph, the suffering through which Joseph went, which were unjust, unfair, he was innocent of everything. The same way Yeshua, when he came the first time as a servant, he went through a lot of suffering unjustly because he was always an innocent man. He never sinned, and yet he went through all these things. So in that sense, Joseph represents Yeshua as Messiah ben Yosef. But the same way that Joseph has been exalted to a position of reigning and ruling, so Yeshua has been exalted by the Father at his right hand to be ruler, to be reigning on the earth when he comes back as king. So that will be Messiah ben David, reigning and ruling like David. Verse 8, so now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Okay. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. So now he's desiring to have his father know the truth. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children's children, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. So why Goshen? Because Goshen, first of all, is in the northern part of the delta, and that is very fertile land, which means that it's good for pasture. Because you have to remember that Joseph's brothers have sheep and cows, and so they have a lot of animals, and that's going to be the best area. Also, Goshen is going to be far away from the main civilization, from the main influence of Egypt, therefore avoiding assimilation, at least up to this point. Verse 11. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of famine. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks to you. Now, what the commentaries say is that when he says your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that Joseph showed his circumcision to his brothers. Because remember, the Egyptians, it was not their custom to circumcise the males. So when he's speaking to his brothers, he shows his circumcision as a proof that he is Joseph. And not only that, that when he's speaking, now he's speaking to them in Hebrew, in their language. Verse 13, so you shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Remember that the last time he saw Benjamin, Benjamin was a little boy. And now he's a man, he's a grown man, 22 years have passed. So he's all those years without seeing his brother, so they embrace and they weep together, different from the embracement between Esau and Jacob, which the commentaries say that Esau tried to bite Jacob's neck. So here we have a different kissing, a different hugging. It's something that's really, really real from the heart. 15, moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and after that his brothers talked with him. Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. Why did it please Pharaoh? Because you have to remember that Joseph got into this position as being a prisoner, as being a slave. So when Pharaoh and everybody, all the officials see that his brothers come, now they understand and realize that Joseph has always been a free man, that he comes from a family that are not slaves. So that makes it even more important for Pharaoh to understand that really Joseph was not a slave, and really he was in prison unjustly. Verse 17, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded, do this, take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, bring your father and come. Also, do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. In other words, if they couldn't bring everything they had, not to worry, because they were not going to have any lack of anything in Egypt. Pharaoh was willing to give them everything they needed. Verse 21, then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. Now remember that when there's a change of garments, it means this is a transition. It's showing a ritual of transition. There's a change of status. Not only that, the 300, the number 300 is related to the letter Shin, because the numeric value of the letter Shin is 300. Remember that Shin is associated with Shaddai, and that is the name that Jacob related with God in terms of El Shaddai. and 5 changes of garments. So he gives a lot more to his brother than to the other ones, again, showing favor. Now, probably this was still testing them to make sure they wouldn't fight about this. Verse 23, and he sent to his father these things, 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. Because you also have to remember that this is not a trip like to the corner. It's month of going back to Canaan and months returning to Egypt. So it could easily have taken them 6 months to probably a year in all this transit from one place to the other. Verse 24, so he sent his brothers away and they departed, and he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. In other words, don't fight because I gave Benjamin more than I did the rest of you. You're grown men now, so stop fighting about things like that. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. In other words, Jacob could have had almost like a heart attack because he could not believe what they were telling him. Imagine the guys that had told him that Joseph was dead, that they showed him his tunic, all was blood, and now they're saying that he's alive. And not only that he's alive, that he is ruling in Egypt. And another thing that the commentaries say is that Jacob, since the moment that Joseph disappeared, his spiritual being, his closeness with God kind of got dark. He was kind of isolated because he was so sad because of losing Joseph. But when this happens and he realizes that Joseph is alive, he's revived, which means that the Spirit, the Holy Spirit again was in his life, the Shekhinah, the presence of the Lord. And he says, what did he say? But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived. Then Israel. Now they changed from Jacob to Israel. Remember that every time they use the name Israel, it means that he's in a higher spiritual status. Then Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Chapter 46. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So he goes, before he goes down to Egypt, he goes and has a time of honoring and worship and praying before the Lord at the altar that he had built. And says, then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. So remember, this is important because this is really the reason that Israel, that Jacob and his children go down to Egypt, because the purpose was God making them a nation. And it says, I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. In other words, Joseph will be there when you die. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones and their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons and his sons' sons, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. Now these were the names of the children of Israel, Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. I'm not going to read all the names. I'm just going to read the main names. And then if you go from there, verse 9, the sons of Reuben, verse 10, the sons of Simeon, verse 11, the sons of Levi, verse 12, the sons of Judah, verse 13, the sons of Issachar, verse 14, the sons of Zebulun. And verse 15 says, these were the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram with his daughter Dinah. All the persons, his sons and his daughters, were 33. Verse 16, the sons of Gad, 17, the sons of Asher, 18, these were the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. Verse 19, the sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, were Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenat, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. The sons of Benjamin. Now that's just to let you know that Benjamin was already a man. He had already 10 children. The sons of Benjamin, verse 22. These were the sons of Rachel, who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. Verse 23, the son of Dan. Verse 24, the sons of Naphtali. Verse 25, these were the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter. And she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons who went with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. They did not count the women. They only counted the men because they were the heads of the families. Okay, remember, this is a patriarch society, so they're naming them based on the father. The women are not counted here. So up to now, there's 66 persons, but if you count Jacob and you count Joseph and you count Manasseh and you count Ephraim, it gives you a total of 70 people. Verse 27, and the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. Now remember that the women are not being counted, but it tells you 70 people. Why? Because this number is more symbolic than a literal number of all the people that went down to Egypt. Because 70 has to do with perfection, with completion, has to do with creation, has to do with holiness, has to do with the temple. So in the Bible, many times the Bible uses numbers, which may not be an exact number, but it's a rounded up number or a number that's more symbolic than anything else, because we know there was more than 70 people because they didn't count the women. Verse 28, then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. Now, some of the commentaries say that why did he send Judah first? And they say that he sent Judah first so that Judah could establish a yeshiva, a house of study, a Beit Midrash. Why? Because the purpose has always been for Israel to bring to the nations the knowledge of Hashem. And so the way they explain, the Jews explain it, is that they were to teach and find the sparks. The sparks are the people, the souls that belong to the Lord. Verse 29, so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Imagine, so long without seeing his father, 22 years. And Israel said to Joseph, now let me die since I have seen your face because you are still alive. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock. And they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation, that you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now, but we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Now, according to the commentaries, for the Egyptians, any person that was not an Egyptian, that was a foreigner, they disliked. And not only that, they didn't like people that were shepherds. Why? Because remember that the majority of the gods in Egypt were represented by livestock, by sheep, by cattle, by goats. And so therefore to them, someone that shepherds these animals, they're basically, it was an abomination to them, because it was like they didn't see them as gods like the Egyptians did. Chapter 47, then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Now, even though here doesn't mention who these brothers were, and in the rabbinical Bereshit Rabbah, it mentions that they were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Benjamin, and Issachar. And why did he present these? Because the commentaries say that these men looked weaker than the rest of their brothers, and therefore Pharaoh would not choose them to be part of his of his household or of his officials. So it was a way to make sure that Pharaoh did not take them to be part of his court. And it says, verse 3, then Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? Now, you're probably asking, why does he ask Jacob about the age? I mean, you're just meeting a person, and why do you ask? Well, the thing is that you have to remember that the Egyptians did not live very long. And so when he sees Jacob, Jacob is an elderly. So to him, it's an amazement, someone so old.
Oh, I see.
So that's what he wanted. Why? How come you're so old? How is it that you have been able to live so long? But Jacob says the following. The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. So he's 130 years old, which to Pharaoh, that is an amazement. But yet he says, few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. Remember that Isaac lived to be 180 years old. So Jacob feels that 130 is not enough. And yet to Pharaoh, it's a lot of years. So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with bread according to the number in their families. So again, the provision, the protection, the security that Joseph is giving to his family, which is something that we need to foresee as a time of the Messianic age. That the same way Yeshua as king will be providing, will be protecting, will be providing security to his people. Verse 13, now there was no bread in all the land, nor the famine, for the famine was very severe. So the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Now here we see the integrity of Joseph, because Joseph is receiving all this money, and yet he's giving it back to the right place, to the right owner, which is Pharaoh. He's not taking any of it. He could have, but he didn't do that. Why? Because the same way as Joseph, we ourselves have to learn to maintain our integrity and our responsibility, because we represent Yeshua, we represent the kingdom. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed. So now they've run out of money to buy food. Then Joseph said, give your livestock and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone. So now Joseph is asking in exchange for food to give their livestock, their animals. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle of the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year had ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our land. So now they're willing to give up everything else to make sure they have food. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate. So the guy that had been a slave now is turning all of Egypt into slaves. The people are selling themselves as servants to Pharaoh so they are able to have food. Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians, sold his field because the famine was severe upon them. So the land became Pharaoh's. So now everything belongs to Pharaoh, including the people. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other end. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their lands. Because you have to remember that the priests in the eyes of Pharaoh were very important people. Why? Because they were the magicians, they were the wise men, they were the doctors. So politically, it was convenient for Pharaoh to have these people happy. So he didn't buy their land, but he always gave them food and everything they needed. Because having these people under him were part of his power, of his authority. Then Joseph said to the people, indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. In other words, 20% of whatever they harvested had to go to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own as seed for the field and for your food, for those of your households, and as food for your little ones. So even though they sold everything to Pharaoh, Pharaoh was going to give them seed. They were going to use the land that belonged to Pharaoh. And when they harvested, 20% would go to Pharaoh and everything else will be for them. So what we're seeing here is that Joseph is fulfilling as a ruler, justice and righteousness. He's not doing this. He's not oppressing the people. He's not stealing from the people. He's giving them what they need in exchange for everything else that they have given him. But his ruling was justice and righteousness, which we understand that Pharaoh also was a just and righteous king. Therefore, here, Joseph is not abusing of his power. Joseph, he could have easily done anything with his brothers, and yet he forgives his brothers. He forgives everything that has happened to him because he understands that this has been all along the plan of the Lord. Verse 25, so they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5 except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. So Israel, doesn't say Jacob. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. When it says that they had possessions, the commentaries say that they bought land. They became too comfortable, and we're going to see that they're going to be assimilating into the culture of Egypt, and that's going to bring some problems later on. So that's the Torah portion.
Yeah.
We're going to have some questions.
No, I was thinking when you said, no, I forgot what it was. Let me see if I remember what the question was. Oh, when they say that Joseph was going maybe to commentary to prove that he has the circumcision. That was here. I don't think he did that because enough was for him to recognize him as a hero, speaking his own language, asking for the father. That one, they showing up, maybe the circumcision was.
Well, it's a commentary because you have to remember he doesn't look like a Hebrew. He looks completely like an Egyptian. He's completely disguised. I mean, that's what they're saying. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a commentary.
It's a commentary.
Yeah. I don't like that one.
Yeah. Any questions, people in the internet? Any questions, Gita? No. Miss Linda.
Now, Pastor,
Yes.
you talked about only the men being counted.
Yes.
And we talked about this a few minutes ago, but Dina is counted.
Yes, Gina is counted. Yes, it's interesting that she's counted the same way she's counted as the only daughter, and we know there were more daughters. So therefore, remember, she's important. Dina represents, she's the 7th of all the children that were born to Jacob. She has to do with judgment. So therefore, it's very important to, within the story, she's the one that's signaled out by the Lord among all the female in the family of Jacob. Yeah. I didn't read anything else related to Dina. If you found something.
Couldn't find anything else related to her either.
Yeah.
You know. But she just stands out like a sore thumb, simply because we don't hear anything about her
Right.
after the rape, after the sexual whatever encounter.
So it makes gives the impression that she stayed with her father's house. She probably didn't marry again. And also remember that in a way, Dina represents the temple. She's the seventh one that was born to Jacob. And so there's some people make their correlation with the temple.
See you over there Saturday.
Okay, see you. Thank you. Any other question? Linda, anybody else?
Pastor,
Yes.
I noticed, and maybe this is just me, when the brothers are talking with Joseph, Joseph's first message of concern is, your father still alive? And they are so in shock. I guess they don't hear because they do not respond to his question.
Right, because remember that his thing is his relationship with Jacob was so close. That's what he's more concerned about, because maybe he thinks that their brothers are lying to him, like they've been lying all this time about everything. So they probably trying to appease him. They've been telling him that he's okay, so he really wants to know if it's true or not.
And I would think, I know in one of the midrashes that I read, it said that on their way back to Canaan, they decided, we can't tell our father this because it will kill him, that Joseph is alive. So there was a young lady in the group that was a beautiful singer, and they said that they sent for her before they got inside the family camp and had her go to Israel singing.
Yeah, I heard that it was his granddaughter, one of his granddaughters or daughters that sent him a story just to kind of, yeah. Again, it's a midrash, it's a story. If it's true or not, I don't know.
Okay. So you had heard that before?
Yes. But remember that the midrash is based on the Torah, but they kind of not add to it, make it more elaborate. They put in things to kind of satisfy our curiosity or what could have happened, kind of to add to the storyline. But so it might be true, it might not be true.
Pastor, I was reading that in last week's lesson, and with it being the time of Hanukkah, they were saying that they preferred the wood dreidels, simply because the lesson talks about the two pieces of wood being brought together and being one in Ezekiel. And that was one of the additional scriptures to read. And I was saying to myself, they went on to say that the letters on the dreidel represents a miracle occurred there initially. He said, but then they changed it to say a miracle occurred here.
Well, in Israel, it's a miracle that occurred here. They say it in Israel, they say a miracle that occurred here, but when it's outside of Israel, you say it's a miracle that occurred there.
Okay, I wanted to get clarified, because the article I was reading didn't clarify that, that the people in Israel said, you know what I'm saying? And I thought that's the way it was. Right.
But if you're in Israel, you're going to say miracle that occurred here. If you're out of Israel, you're going to say the miracle that occurred there. That makes a change.
Okay. And also the numerical value went down when they said that a miracle that occurred here.
Yeah, and changes the letter, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting little facts about it.
Yeah, and I thought it was, to me, it sounded valid. but that's me.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I think I have all my questions, man.
Yeah, this Torah portion was very straightforward.
Yeah.
Now afterwards, what's going to happen and the next Torah portion, finishing the book of Bereshit, it's going to be a few things that are going to be different because we will be going, remember that the exile and all the things that are going to happen with Israel, with the descendants and the slavery and Moses. And so it gets better.
I do have another question, Pastor. Whenever the Israelites are taught, whenever Joseph and Jacob meet up again, you said that they took 5 men, and I remember that, but you said they took a certain 5 brothers. I only got the names of one.
Yes, it was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Benjamin, and Issachar. And then again, that's a commentary from Bereshit and Rabbah, which is kind of like a midrash. So again, it's a midrash. If it were true or not, I don't know. But they mentioned that it was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Benjamin, and Issachar.
And they said these looked
weaker than the rest.
Okay.
So kind of to discourage Pharaoh not to choose them to be part of his herdsmen or whatever.
Yeah, because he did say, ask them to take his cattle.
Right. But apparently that did not happen. So Joseph was trying to avoid that happening. So they would not get mixed with the culture, mixed with the people. Besides, they were really not appreciated because they were shepherds. So I guess it was to try avoid other social issues with them. But we know eventually that didn't work out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have one more Torah study next week, next Friday, next Saturday, God willing. And then afterwards, like I said, that will be the last English Torah study. So hopefully I'll see you guys again. Have an awesome rest of Shabbat, which is almost closing. Yes, ma'am.
Pastor, and you made mention to it. I'm sorry. You said that while Joseph was talking with his brothers, that Manasseh was standing there as his interpreter.
That's a commentary. Again, another midrash that they say that the interpreter was Manasseh. Yes.
Okay, they said that in one of the midrashes that I read also, it said that Judah started getting very emotional. And so Judah, with all the strength and power that have been preyed upon them by Isaac whenever they went to war after Shechem had been destroyed. They went to war with Shechem's, all the countries that recognized Shechem. And they were saying that these men did mighty exploits. They had the prayer that Isaac prayed for them. So whenever Judah became hyperactive, he let out one of those screams and it shook Pharaoh's palace. And he couldn't understand, it shook Egypt, the inner city. And he couldn't understand because according to the midrash that I was studying, Joseph looked to the side at his son Manasseh, and Manasseh let the same scream out. So Judah looked at his brother and said, are we kin to them? Have you read that midrash?
I haven't read that one.
Okay.
But then again, remember, midrash is a story, not necessarily true. It's just to add to it. So again, you know, you have to be careful with midrash. Midrash is not think I heard someone say it's not to be believed. It's just there for expanding our curiosity, but not necessarily it is 100% true.
It only came to my mind whenever you said.
Yeah, but I haven't read that. No.
Okay. Well, you said Manasseh was standing there interpreting.
Right.
for
That's what they say. That Manasseh was the interpreter for.
Well, he was a little boy, wasn't he?
Not by. Yeah,
Maybe a teenager?
but he was old enough to do the job, I guess. I mean, I don't know exactly what age, but he was old enough to do the job. So that means that Joseph was taught them Hebrew. He kept his culture. He kept his, his faith, and he taught them. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I guess, like I said, I'll see you guys next Shabbat. Till then, have a good one. Be blessed. Take care. See you later.
Love you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.